this isn't going to be in the form of a question, but basically what I'd like to do is to throw out an idea, just give a basic sketch of this idea that I've been working with lately and get your reactions to it. It's an idea that involves a, I don't want to say fundamental, but a major rethinking of the last 500 years intellectual history and a recategorization in order to make better sense out of it. Basically, what I'm interested in is the concept of modernity, what it is that makes us modern, or that doesn't make us modern, makes us not modern, what the concept means, and the particular area that I'm interested in, at least recently, with regard to it, is whether modernity is something that endorses single system or multiple system thinking, which is something that I think relates it to something that is, of great interest to general semantics. The idea of a one system that basically represents all knowledge, and this idea of the fit between the system and reality. Basically, I was stimulated by the debate that came out of the late 70s and 80s about post-modernity. I mean, before we really nailed down what modernity is, I mean, one of the things that I've been kind of struck by is the lack of any kind of real consensus as to what modernity is, when we became modern, how we became modern, what it means, let alone how it is that we came not to be. A lot of inconsistencies in the post-modernity debate, a lot of kind of demonization of modernity, a lot of things that struck me about what people were saying about post-modernity seeming very comfortably modern to me, as far as my informal conceptions of what it was. So I started to look into this. Actually, I got into the area of art history, which art historians seem to be looking at the question in a clearer way than other people. And one of the things that this led me to was a whole examination of the Renaissance, which, surprise, surprise, is something that the closer you look at the Renaissance, its conceptualization, the characterization of certain events and ideas as being Renaissance or non-Renaissance, that there's an astounding lack of agreement in art history and intellectual history as to what the Renaissance was, what it is, when it went on, anyway, somewhere between the 10th century and the 18th century, maybe with gaps in between. You get some pretty divergent, some notably unclear opinions about just what was going on there. And what impressed me, and the idea that I've been following through and finding a lot of very interesting correlations and developing a lot of insights through, was the idea that there is a fundamental, and I'll use the word fundamental here, misconception about the relationship of the Renaissance to modernity. It's a very knee-jerk kind of thing to say, yeah, modernity, our eyes were opened in the Renaissance, we became modern at this point, all the faults of that era basically get heaped onto the concept of modernity, and that's something that has been just sort of accepted without question for a very long time. And one of the idea that I basically have come up with here is that very far from being the birth of the modern era, the Renaissance was the culmination of the pre-modern period. That if you look at art history, the area that I've been looking at in a lot of detail has been painting, but I'm beginning to see this in literature and poetry and sculpture and other arts as well, that there were no innovations in the Renaissance system of representation. And the idea of representation here, because what I'm talking about is not just artistic representation, but systems of representation of reality, ways that we symbolically represent the world. That there's nothing in the Renaissance representational system of painting that is not to be found somewhere or other, and most often in many places, helter-skelter, unsystematically, but definitely there throughout the Gothic period. So what you see is that the Renaissance took things that had been pre-modern, things that had been around, and consolidated them. I mean, what was the claims that were made for these things were different. I mean, if you spoke to a Gothic painter about, for example, how when you paint the Virgin Mary, how do you know what she looks like? How do you know how to represent her? They'd say, well, you know, the guy who I came up under, my apprentice to, did it this way, so I did. It was just sort of this mechanical, not conscious passing on of certain techniques. But what the Renaissance did was it created a sense of system. It wasn't a particularly new idea of system. It was a rebirth. It was a rebirth of something that had been implicit, at least in the classical civilization of the Romans. And what you really have in the Renaissance, and this is the what I would consider to be the straw man, the thing that is attacked, when people attack modernity, they're attacking, is this notion of having a single, all-encompassing system that one can rely on, the systematization. You think about Ang's book on Ramism, the idea of having a method, that it opens all doors, that, a universal language that can somehow find a neutral, objective way of representing the reality, a single kind of, a trick. But that actually this idea is a very classical notion, which basically is something that what we could argue is actually a very non or anti-modern kind of conception. Classicism consists of three basic elements: things from the past that have stood the test of time, so as to suggest universal, timeless standards. This is something that, in particular, if you look at the history of the printing press, right, and literacy, the print revolution, the Renaissance was looking to take things from the past that were having trouble having trouble standing this test of time, but that were seen as needing to stand this test of time, that were worthy of being brought forward, so as to suggest this universal system. But one of the things that you find is that the more that you're able to represent this system, the more actual success that you have in representing this system. Right? Once print, at least in terms of the print medium, is able to keep these things from passing away or being imperfectly remembered, standing the test of time. Once they actually do stand the test of time, they're found to be wanting. That you begin to open the way for innovation. You find the way for other perspectives. You find the way of looking at things differently. You can stand on the shoulders of giants, and then you can thus surpass them. So the idea that I'm working with, or this is the event here that I'm working off of, is the idea that modernity was not the product directly of the Renaissance, but that it was the product of an intellectual crisis of the Renaissance. Certain historians that I've been reading have argued that at the time that these Renaissance systems were being brought to fruition, no serious thinker really believed that any of these things were going to be this perfect, sort of eternal way of representing knowledge. That the keen minds saw that crisis coming, and that the idea of modernity is one in which there's a certain need for system, like Kuhn talks about the need for paradigm, but always talking about anomalies, always talking about the idea of a revolution, the need of having being replaced by new paradigms. What you see, what I came to see is that the era that came out of the Renaissance, that came out of this intellectual crisis, out of these systems being pushed to the point of crisis, was that there was a cultural sensibility. It was a style in art, but it was more than that, called mannerism, in which you begin to see painters seeing the obsolescence of the Renaissance system of representation, this neutral way of representing the world, began to combine different systems of representation within the same work of art, Gothic and Renaissance. But once you begin to have these two different systems sort of cross-fertilize each other, McLuhan calls this hybrid energy. I think with the idea of various kind of interface medium, you see a kind of hybrid energy interface between different systems working. The idea of multi-paradigm representation, the idea of representing things in multiple ways at the same time. I forgot, I think it was Fitzgerald says the mark of a sophisticated mind is the ability to be able to entertain two contradictory propositions simultaneously. So what you begin to have in this period is this idea of a kind of anxiety about systems, a kind of obsession with it. You need the kind of systematic discipline in order to test the system's limits, but that this always throws one's attention upon the possibility of other perspectives, of multi-perspective thinking, and that this is something that in art is certainly something that's seen as modern art, moving towards a more subjective kind of approach, more of an idea of looking at multiple perspectives at the same time. But it's also something that we associate with the cultural sensibility of Romanticism. That Romanticism was something during the Revolutionary period, during the French Revolution, and the revolutions that came out in the wake of it. This idea of a period that following a period of classicism, a period of reaction against classicism, of anti-classicism, of a kind of embrace of heterogeneity, of subjectivity, of a sense of the superficiality or the subjective nature of any kind of system. So on the one hand, you get the idea that Romanticism is the sensibility, or mannerism and Romanticism both have that common element of being anti-classical movements that embrace this idea of multi-system heterogeneity. So that modernity is something that has a kind of complex relationship to classicism. Modernity has always resisted classicism, but it's always had a certain dependence upon the discipline that's inherent in it. So it's not just a matter of throwing away system, it's not a matter of just doing your own thing or lapsing into a kind of a free-floating subjectivity, but the need of this this attitude toward heterogeneity and this attitude to systematic discipline, needing to interact with each other. That there's a dialect of history that goes back and forth between classical and anti-classical sensibility. So in a way, to sort of systematize the idea of modernity as something that's merely anti-classical in itself is a system, in itself is too simple. So the idea of looking for as much as possible in this cultural history that flows out of the Mannerist era, for traces of this interdependence of system and heterogeneity. One of the things that is encouraging to me, because this is sort of I realize I've run around and done a lot of things here, this is a basic idea here, that 4 or 5 years ago, when you would look for books on mannerism, there were very few. They tended to go back to the 1950s, at a time when this period in art history was even not really very well known. If you talk to people with MFAs, with PhDs in art history, some of them they'll give you, the little 2-paragraph squib on mannerism. But it's an era that tends to get swallowed up. Either people extend the Renaissance into it, or pull down the Baroque era into it. But what you're beginning to see, first I've noticed in certain Romance language art history books, there's more and more books about contemporary events, conceiving of them as an extension of the Mannerist era. People who used to use the word postmodernity in terms of talking about these developments are going back to looking at Mannerism. In the English language, the last studies of literature and poetry, the symbolist poets of the 17th century, Shakespeare, Cervantes. I've been seeing a lot of books that have been talking about this Mannerist sensibility of the 16th century and carrying it through into the most recent developments in cultural history in the recent era. So what I'm looking to you guys for is I'm making all of these correlations from the Mannerist era through the Romantic era to the present time, and I'm just wondering if any of this stuff clicks with you. If you can help me out with this stuff. I mean, I know it probably the lens always has a good way of dealing with these things. But if you have any things that ring a bell that you could tell me about cultural events, things in history, or things in the arts, or things that you're doing research in that correlate with this, I'd be appreciative. Thanks.